What if the soul of an entire nation were poured into a single road? Not a monument, not a speech, just 2,448 miles of cracked asphalt from Chicago to Los Angeles. People didn't drive it for fun. They drove it because they had nowhere else to go and everything to lose. Yes, I am talking about Route 66, which carried dreams, heartbreak, and a kind of freedom that no highway ever matched again. I used AI to bring back the history of it, so stay with me because this story is bigger than the road itself. Quickly, before we start, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so now. Thank you, and let's start. By the early 1920s, car ownership across America was exploding, and ordinary families were suddenly dreaming about driving west. The problem was brutal. No reliable highway connected the Midwest to the Pacific. If you wanted to drive from Chicago to Los Angeles, you navigated a maze of dirt tracks and muddy farm roads with no guarantee you would make it. A Tulsa businessman named Cyrus Avery sat on the Federal Highway Planning Board and pushed relentlessly to change that. He understood that a numbered highway would bring tourists and money to every small town it passed through. By 1926, his vision was complete. U.S. Route 66 stretched 2,448 miles across 8 states. Avery originally wanted Route 60, but a dispute forced a compromise, and nobody could have predicted those 2 digits would become iconic. But here is the important thing to understand about Route 66 in its earliest days. When it was first designated in 1926, most of the road was not actually paved. Large stretches were still graded dirt or loose gravel, especially through the rural plains of Oklahoma, Texas, and New Mexico. Driving the full length of Route 66 in the late 1920s was not a smooth, comfortable cruise. It was a genuine adventure that required patience, spare tires, and a willingness to push through miles of choking dust and unpredictable weather. The Federal Aid Highway Acts of 1916 and 1921 had established federal funding for a national road network, and through the late 1920s, individual states began the slow, expensive work of paving their sections of Route 66. State highway crews worked section by section, deploying early motor graders to level and smooth the earth before anything else could begin. These machines, often little more than horse-drawn blades newly fitted with gasoline engines, scraped the roadbed flat and pushed drainage ditches along both shoulders to prevent the infamous mud swamps that had swallowed wheels whole in earlier years. Cyrus Avery himself became the road's greatest promoter during this period. He helped organize publicity campaigns, encouraged local businesses to advertise along the highway, and even worked to rename and rebrand parts of his home city of Tulsa to capitalize on the growing fame of the route. Route 66 signs began springing up at crossroads and gas stations across the Midwest, and the highway started developing something that no other American road had ever really achieved before. In the late 1920s and early 1930s, the preferred surface was macadam, a method of compressing layers of broken stone until they locked together under pressure. It was cheap, reasonably fast, and far better than dirt, but it crumbled quickly under heavy truck traffic and had to be constantly repaired. Then came the decade that gave Route 66 its soul. In the 1930s, the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl combined to create one of the worst humanitarian disasters in American history. Poor harvests, prolonged drought, and relentless dust storms devastated farming communities across the Great Plains. More than 200,000 desperate people fled westward during the Dust Bowl years, and for many of them, Route 66 was the only road they knew that led toward California and the promise of work, food, and survival. Ironically, even as desperate families were fleeing across it, Route 66 itself was still being actively built beneath their wheels. New Deal relief programs put thousands of unemployed men to work widening lanes, pouring fresh concrete slabs, and replacing crumbling dirt sections with proper pavement across Oklahoma, Texas, and New Mexico. Gangs of laborers swung picks and shoveled gravel by hand, alongside rumbling diesel graders and steamrollers, pushing the construction westward mile by mile through the same parched landscape that was driving people off their land. The road and the migration were happening simultaneously. One built out of desperation for work, the other traveled out of desperation for survival. Families loaded everything they owned onto battered trucks and rattling jalopies and pointed themselves west down Route 66. They drove through Oklahoma, across the Texas Panhandle, through the deserts of New Mexico and Arizona, and finally into California, where they hoped to find jobs picking fruit or working on farms. Many of them found only more hardship and hostility when they arrived. But the road itself became a symbol of hope, a lifeline connecting despair to the possibility of something better. In 1939, John Steinbeck published The Grapes of Wrath, a novel that followed the Joad family on their desperate journey west along Route 66. Steinbeck gave the highway its most enduring nickname, calling it the Mother Road, the Road of Flight. The 1940 film adaptation starring Henry Fonda only cemented that image deeper into the American imagination. Suddenly, Route 66 was not just pavement and painted lines. It was a story, a symbol, and a promise that had been driven into the national consciousness by hundreds of thousands of real people carrying real suffering and real hope in the backs of their overloaded trucks. As traffic along Route 66 increased through the 1930s, a completely new kind of American economy began sprouting up along the highway's shoulders. Businesses appeared to serve the endless stream of drivers passing through. Wooden tourist cabins and small motor courts evolved into the earliest versions of what we now call motels. Diners flipped hamburgers under glowing neon signs. Gas stations dotted the roadside at regular intervals, each one competing for the attention of dusty travelers who needed fuel, food, and a few hours of rest. Towns that Route 66 passed through became 24-hour havens for motorists. Amarillo, Oklahoma City, Flagstaff, and dozens of smaller communities built their entire local economies around the highway traffic. Billboards sprang up from miles in every direction, advertising everything from dentists to dry cleaners to roadside attractions. Traveling Route 66 became a genuine rite of passage for American families, and the road earned yet another nickname that stuck: the Main Street of America. By 1938, every mile of Route 66 had finally been paved from end to end. What had started as a collection of dirt trails and gravel paths was now a continuous ribbon of smooth asphalt stretching from the shores of Lake Michigan to the beaches of the Pacific Ocean. That milestone mattered enormously, because it meant that for the first time, any American with a car and enough gasoline could drive from Chicago to Los Angeles without ever leaving a paved surface. The dream that Cyrus Avery had championed in the early 1920s was finally fully realized. When World War II arrived, Route 66 took on an entirely new kind of importance. The highway became a critical corridor for military traffic, carrying troops, equipment, and supplies across the country to training bases and ports on the West Coast. Convoys of military trucks rolled down the same pavement that Dust Bowl families had traveled just a few years earlier. Gas rationing meant that civilian driving was severely restricted, and long fill-up lines at roadside stations became a common sight throughout the war years. Despite the wartime restrictions, Route 66's strategic value only reinforced its importance in the minds of federal planners and military officials. The highway proved that a continuous cross-country road was not just a convenience for tourists. It was a matter of national security. That realization would have consequences down the road, because it planted the seeds for the massive interstate highway system that would eventually replace Route 66 entirely. When the war ended and restrictions were lifted, America hit the open road with a vengeance. Car production, which had dropped to just 65,000 vehicles in 1945 due to wartime manufacturing priorities, skyrocketed to 3.9 million by 1948. Millions of Americans suddenly had brand new cars with chrome bumpers and white wall tires, and they wanted to drive them somewhere exciting. Route 66 was waiting for them with open arms. The highway itself was being upgraded to meet that surge. Through the late 1940s, highway engineers attacked the remaining rough stretches with a new generation of post-war machinery: heavier bulldozers, motorized asphalt pavers, and pneumatic tire rollers that laid smoother, more durable surfaces than anything the Depression-era crews had managed. Narrow two-lane sections through the Ozarks and across the New Mexico Plateau were widened and realigned. Dangerous blind curves were cut back, and old warped concrete slabs were torn up and replaced with fresh bituminous asphalt. that offered a quieter, more comfortable ride. The same industrial capacity that had built tanks and aircraft was now being redirected into road building, and Route 66 absorbed the benefits of that shift mile by mile. The late 1940s were a golden moment for the highway. Every motel, diner, gas station, and roadside attraction along the route was packed with post-war travelers eager to experience the freedom of the open road after years of rationing and restriction. Families loaded up their cars and headed west to see the Grand Canyon, the Painted Desert, and the California coastline. Honeymooning couples drove Route 66 as their first great adventure together. And returning veterans who had seen the highway during their wartime travels came back as tourists to explore it at their own pace. The 1950s were the absolute peak of Route 66's fame and cultural power. This was the decade when the highway became more than just a road. It became a symbol of everything Americans believed about themselves: freedom, prosperity, adventure, and the wide-open possibility of the West. Families piled into wood-paneled station wagons and drove for days across the country, stopping at every roadside attraction, kitschy gift shop, and neon-lit motel along the way. Pop culture embraced Route 66 completely during this era. Nat King Cole had recorded his famous song, "Get Your Kicks On," Route 66 back in 1946, and by the 1950s it had become an unofficial anthem for American road travel. Travel magazines ran glowing features about the adventure of a cross-country drive on the Mother Road. Postcards from every town along the route sold by the millions. The highway was more popular, more profitable, and more culturally significant than it had ever been at any point in its history. The road itself was being rebuilt to handle the flood of traffic. Through the early 1950s, state highway departments tore up the last surviving dirt and gravel sections and replaced them with wide asphalt lanes strong enough to carry the heavier post-war automobiles and commercial trucks that were multiplying by the year. Concrete overpasses replaced dangerous at-grade railroad crossings that had caused countless accidents in earlier decades. And the roadside attractions kept getting bigger and stranger. Giant dinosaur statues, wigwam-shaped motels, and enormous neon cowboys beckoned travelers off the highway and into towns that depended entirely on Route 66 traffic for their survival. Every mile of the road told a story, and every story ended with a souvenir shop and a recommendation to keep driving west. But even at the height of its glory, Route 66 was already being marked for replacement. President Dwight Eisenhower, who had been deeply impressed by Germany's high-speed Autobahn during World War II, championed the creation of a massive new interstate highway system for the United States. In 1956, the Federal Aid Highway Act authorized the construction of a 40,000-mile network of modern expressways designed to move traffic faster and more safely than any two-lane highway ever could. The interstates were wider, straighter, and faster than Route 66, and they were designed to bypass the small towns and local main streets that had made the Mother Road so charming and so profitable. The writing was on the wall from the moment the first interstate construction crews broke ground. Through the 1960s and 1970s, the interstates slowly devoured Route 66 one section at a time. Interstate 55 and Interstate 44 covered the old diagonal stretch from Chicago through Missouri and into Oklahoma. Interstate 40 cut a straight line through Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and into California, bypassing dozens of small towns that had depended on Route 66 traffic for decades. Each time a new section of interstate opened, the effect on nearby Route 66 communities was devastating and almost immediate. Traffic that had once flowed steadily through town now roared past on the new highway a few miles away, and drivers exited into anonymous rest stops and chain gas stations instead of pulling into the locally owned diners and neon-lit motels that had been the lifeblood of these communities for 30 years. Businesses that had thrived for decades closed their doors within months. Motels went dark. Diners locked up for the last time. Entire towns that had been built around Route 66 found themselves suddenly and permanently bypassed. On June 26, 1979, highway officials voted to officially remove Route 66 from the United States highway system. The process of decommissioning unfolded over the next 6 years as the final sections of the Interstate were completed. The last segment of original Route 66 to be replaced was in Arizona, near the town of Williams, where the final stretch was closed for Interstate 40 construction in 1984. With that closure, Route 66 was officially dead. The signs came down, the maps were redrawn, and the most famous highway in American history was reduced to a patchwork of local roads, forgotten frontage lanes, and crumbling pavement slowly being reclaimed by weeds and desert sand. But the story did not end there, because the people who loved Route 66 refused to let it disappear. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, grassroots preservation groups sprang up in every state along the old highway. Local business owners, history enthusiasts, and nostalgic travelers organized campaigns to save what was left of the Mother Road before it crumbled away entirely. They lobbied state governments to install historic Route 66 signs along the surviving stretches of the original highway, and they fought to protect the aging motels, diners, gas stations, and roadside attractions that had made the road so special. Their efforts reached the federal level in 1990, when Congress passed the Route 66 Study Act. That legislation eventually led to the creation of the National Route 66 Corridor Preservation Program, which provided funding and support for restoring landmarks, neon signs, and historic structures along the entire length of the old highway. One by one, faded motels were repainted, crumbling gas stations were stabilized, and vintage neon signs were rewired and lit up again for the first time in decades. Today, Route 66 lives on as one of the most beloved and most visited heritage roads in the world. Historic diners, restored service stations, and gloriously kitschy roadside attractions like the Cadillac Ranch in Texas and the Blue Whale in Oklahoma draw thousands of tourists every single year. Museums from Joliet, Illinois to Barstow, California tell the highway's story through photographs, artifacts, and the personal memories of people who once lived and worked along the route. A new generation of travelers now drives Route 66 in vintage cars, motorcycles, and recreational vehicles, retracing the same path that Dust Bowl migrants, wartime convoys, and post-war vacationers once followed. International tourists fly in from Europe, Asia, and South America, specifically to experience the Mother Road, making Route 66 one of the most recognizable American cultural exports in the world. Even now, in 2026, cities from Chicago to Los Angeles are hosting centennial celebrations marking 100 years since the highway was first officially designated. Route 66 was never just asphalt and painted lines. It was built in stages by hand crews swinging picks in Oklahoma dust, steamrollers compacting gravel across the Texas Panhandle, and concrete gangs pouring slabs through the New Mexico heat. Depression-era laborers gritted their teeth for wages that kept their families fed. The road was built more than once by more than one kind of desperation, and that is exactly what makes it worth remembering. That's it for today's video. Please let me know which reconstruction I should do next. If you like this video, subscribe so you never miss the next one, and I will see you in the next video.